Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I woke to the sound of wind moving through dead grass and the clicking of cooling metal. For a second, I thought I was still in our apartment in St. Louis, waiting for another night shift. But the air didn't smell like city dust and laundry detergent. It smelled like diesel, rain-soaked earth, and the faint plastic bite of a tarp stretched over a truck bed. I was stretched out across the bench seat of a Ford F-250 Super Duty, with my jacket bunched as a pillow, cheek pressed to the stitching. The analog dash clock said 5:42 a.m. Dawn made a pale line on the horizon, behind the black silhouette of the grain elevator we had parked beside. My shoulders ached from sleeping in the same position too long, but the ache told me I was still here and still needed. I eased upright, careful not to rattle the first aid kit strapped behind the headrest. My breath fogged the passenger window. Through the glass, Kingdom City's low rooftops sat heavied by humidity and a night of wind. We had left the outskirts of St. Louis the afternoon before, when the local defense line finally gave up ground. In the days leading to that moment, I had watched triage tents at a hospital parking lot fill and then overflow, watched the radio traffic go from organized to frantic, and watched too many families beg for a space in ambulances I knew would never come. The last morning, a captain at the National Guard checkpoint had leaned down to my window, eyes strict but kindly, and told me it was time to go west if I had anywhere left to go. "Stick to I-70, he had said, glancing at my stretcher and jump bag on the back seat. "Missouri's still moving. Past Kansas, I can't promise." Now the interstate was a grey ribbon at my back, and our small convoy sat in a wedge on a gravel lot by a shuttered rural gas station where we had hoped to find our first real fill. It was the kind of place built 20 years earlier and never renovated. 2 island pumps under a tin canopy, a convenience store with faded soda ads bleached to pastel, a payphone that hadn't been removed only because nobody remembered it was there. The power was out. The credit terminals were dead. The fuel gauges read 0 at the dispensers, which meant nothing about the underground tanks. What mattered was whether we could pull fuel without the submersible pumps. In the mirror, I saw the Jeep Cherokee where Mac had slept. Hatch up, tarp suspended from bungee cords to keep the dew off the crates. He was awake already, feet on the ground, a big silhouette with his cap turned backward. He had a habit of walking the perimeter every morning and every evening. Old trucker caution. Jenna had stretched a blue tarp between the Jeep and the Ford to make a rectangle of shade yesterday afternoon. She was asleep on a roll-up mat on the gravel under it, face turned toward a handheld radio that murmured a slow cycle of static and a tone from time to time. Samir was in the back of the Jeep with the GoPro on his chest in a little pocket. Because he had confessed, he'd started falling asleep recording voice notes, and it calmed him down to hear them later. A way of proving the hours hadn't gone anywhere but forward. I slid out of the truck and dropped to the gravel. My boots found rough purchase. The light made the chrome grille wink in the muted sunrise. I ran a hand along the welded steel grille guards over the headlights. It was ugly work, cut from bed frame angle iron and bolted with grade 8 hardware into the frame rails. It had saved our radiator twice yesterday from the bent rebar of a broken guardrail. The truck was a 2007 F-250 6.0-litre Powerstroke diesel, a model every mechanic had an opinion about. We had 2 40-gallon auxiliary tanks mounted in the bed, each with a manual shutoff valve. We'd run fuel lines with quick disconnects so we could gravity feed into the main tank or siphon outward into cans. I had kept the engine maintained because my dad had drilled that into me when I was a teenager. Check the oil, listen to the belts, look at the coolant. Don't wait for problems to become stories. Now those small habits gave us range and confidence, and range and confidence were as valuable as anything in the world. Mac looked over and lifted a hand. "Morning," he said, voice low so he wouldn't wake Jenna yet. "You sleep?" "A little." I walked to the metal cabinet we'd locked the hoses into. You? Enough to keep my hands steady. He nudged the toe of his boot against a plastic fuel jug to find its weight. We're light again, so we do this right. I found a maintenance hatch on the tank lid. It ain't locked. We can hand pump. Slow, but better than running dry before Columbia. Jenna sat up at the sound of our voices, blinked, and pushed hair away from her face. She was younger than me by almost a decade, but she had the calm eyes of someone who, like me, had spent too many nights studying storm forecasts and scanner traffic. Before everything, she had chased thunderstorms in a rusty pickup across plains on weekends, logging cloud bases and hook echoes on radar, calling in reports to National Weather Service spotter nets. Her handheld was a Yaesu FT60, solid, reliable, with a rubber duck antenna wrapped with weathered rescue tape. She had printed a list of old emergency management frequencies and taped it to the back of the radio battery. "Anything?" I asked, nodding to the radio. She shrugged. "Same loop from last night on a weak signal, way west of us, repeating coordinates just west of Topeka, and a request for supplies if we're headed that way." Voice sounds tired but not panicked. Might be automated, might be a small team. Hard to tell. I marked it on the topo. Samir climbed down out of the back, rubbing at his eyes. He wore the same plain field jacket he had left the city in, sleeves rolled. He kept quiet until his brain caught up with the hour. The engineer in him needed a few minutes of boot-up time. We worked like we'd done this a dozen times because we had. The first time with shaking hands and the careful terror of people who don't want to blow themselves up, and the later times with the steady, practiced caution of a procedure. We kept the truck grounded by chaining a clamp to a rebar stake Mac had hammered into the dirt to dissipate static. We avoided metal-on-metal contact. Nitrile gloves, no open flame anywhere, no sparks. We used a rotary hand pump with a crank handle, hose into the tank's maintenance hatch, intake foot filters zip-tied to a stiff length of PVC so it would sit off the bottom and not pull sludge. We took turns at the crank and filled 6 5-gallon yellow diesel cans, plus what we could put into the auxiliary tanks. We stopped to strain a sample into a mason jar to check for water or debris. There was a little sheen, but nothing the truck's fuel-water separator couldn't handle. While Matt cranked, Jenna took a walk around the empty lot, with the Yaesu tuned to the GMRS and FRS channels people often used for short-range chatter. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet where your breath is the loudest thing. Samir balanced on the trunk of a car shoved sideways near the station's entrance and looked up at the sky. "Cumulus building already," he said. "Dew point's gotta be high. We'll get something later." "Storms?" I said. "Looks like it." "Fine," Max said, not looking up from the pump. "We'll drive under 'em. I'd rather rain than heat." We were ready to roll by 7:15 a.m. I stowed the hoses in the cabinet and locked it. The Jeep's hatch closed with a soft thump. We had a system. I took lead in the Ford with Samir riding shotgun to help navigate and check the road ahead. Jenna drove second in the Jeep, with Mac in the passenger seat, watching the engine gauges he'd mounted with zip ties to the dash like a pilot's flight panel. We kept a separation of about 4 car lengths at slow speeds and stretched it when the highway was clearer to give ourselves room to react to obstacles. Before we got onto the ramp for I-70, we halted to review the route. Paper map unfolded across the Ford's hood, coffee stains turning Missouri the color of old tea. I put a finger on Kingdom City and traced west. Fulton, Columbia, Boonville. If we have to detour, we take state roads, but stay parallel to the interstate. We stop if we see a distributor, a farm co-op, or a trucking yard with the right markings. Walmarts and the big box places give us open floor for a camp, but we keep it short. "Copy," Jenna said. She had a black Sharpie tucked in her hair. She pulled it free and added a note near a tiny icon that marked a way station. "Heard a little chatter from a group near Rocheport yesterday. Sounds like they moved north away from the river because they had trouble with bridges. Let's not try the river towns unless we have to." "We don't have to," I said. We pulled onto the interstate. The Ford's diesel rattled steady, lifted by torque that felt like a hand at the back of the truck. The Jeep followed, its inline six ticking a little. The sky widened as we left the shelter of low buildings and trees. The westbound lanes were mottled with abandoned vehicles, but passable. Some exits were blocked with heavy concrete barriers where troopers or transportation crews had tried to control flow. Other exits were marked by nothing more than a makeshift sign, plywood with spray paint, an arrow, a word like church or water or turn back. On a median, I saw a line of candles burned to stubs, wax melted into a pale sculpture against a Jersey barrier, a little shrine to someone who hadn't made it out of their car. We drove with windows cracked to listen for trouble. At 60 miles per hour, the Ford felt like a ship cutting through a weird, quiet sea. I kept both hands at 10 and 2 and my eyes scanning constantly. Mirrors, dash, distance, shoulder. I called out debris like a flight crew reading a checklist. 2x4 in the left lane. Large plastic tote mid-right. Brake rotor near the fog line. Samir repeated each item and kept a pencil note on a legal pad like he was writing the log of a project site. We weren't avoiding every hazard, but the act of naming them kept us present. As the sun rose, the heat woke up with it. The cab turned into a low oven. I kept the AC off to save fuel, and because I wanted every noise. We passed Fulton. On the far side of Columbia, we took a spur into town to check a cluster of auto shops and small industrial buildings. The scene was the new normal. Doors left open in a hurry, computers dead on counters, shop rags stiff with dust, calendars stopped on a month that would never turn again. In a break room, we found a microwave with the door ajar, someone's lunch still inside, a handwritten note taped to the wall that said warehouse keys behind the toolbox, but the toolbox was gone. We took a case of bottled water, 3 quarts of ATF, a set of nitrile gloves, and a roll of heavy trash bags. We left a laminated card with the date and took water, thanks EJMS, because marking our presence made us feel like a string tied to a door latch, something we could follow back to ourselves if we needed to. Remember, we were trying to do this right. By late morning, we were moving through Boonville. The Missouri River was a broad brown line, surface smoothed by heat and a steady southerly wind. The old iron railroad bridge crossed low and still. We stayed on our side of the river and didn't go down into the river town, because river towns had become traps even when nothing there meant to trap you. People had run to the water, then the water had drawn trouble. The main street looked like a movie set after the crew went home, flags limp, posters for cancelled events curling in the corners, one traffic light flashing a dying red on a loop powered by failing battery backup. Jenna came on the handheld. Static is picking up out of the southwest. Might be the storm building. Also got a faint repetition of the Topeka call. Same coordinates, same voice. If it's a loop, it's a clean one. Okay, I said into my microphone. We'll keep our line. If the weather gets bad, we'll find solid cover instead of riding it out on the shoulder. We found our solid cover sooner than planned. A Walmart distribution center on the outskirts of a small town where industry had thinned into flat fields. The distribution center was a big beige box with truck docks along one side and a security office at the gate. The gate was down but not locked. The employee parking lot stretched wide and empty, 100 spaces of faded paint and bits of brown paper lifting in the wind. I had slept in hospitals this size. There was a familiar comfort to the plainness of it. Mac liked the concrete and steel, heavy doors and long lines of sight. Jenna liked that we could rig a wire to the loblolly pines along the fence and hang a better antenna. Inside, the warehouse had the hollow echo of a cathedral. Row after row of tall shelving racks reached into the dimness. The skylights were dirty but let in a pleasing flat light. We parked the Ford and the Jeep between rows so we could watch the two ends, then walked the perimeter with radios on. I kept my Mossberg 500 slung low. It was a long gun I trusted. 12 gauge, 5 in the tube, cylinder bore. I wasn't planning on firing it unless we had to. The M1A with a 20-round magazine stayed in a soft case behind the seat because, in closed spaces, A shotgun kept over-penetration risks down and made me feel like I could end a confrontation without making a bigger mess than necessary. I kept my Glock 19 holstered at my hip on a simple Kydex mount, a flashlight clipped to the front of my chest rig, more important in most places than anything else. Safety on. Finger discipline. No unnecessary handling. The habits came from years of EMS scenes where law enforcement wasn't on site yet, and you were the first adult in the room. Control your hands, your voice, your breathing. We found a forklift with its keys hanging on a retractable reel, like the last worker had set it down for brake and never came back. Mac checked the propane cylinder, fiddled with the choke, and got it to turn over. We used pallets and the forklift to build a quick barricade across the main aisle, leading from the loading dock. We didn't need a fortress. We needed a speed bump, enough to slow anything that wandered our way long enough for us to be on our feet. In the break room, Jenna got a small generator running off a little gasoline I had brought in an old steel can. It made more noise than I liked, but we used it for exactly 15 minutes to power a light string and charge the handhelds back to full. Samir cracked cases of bottled water and wrote 8/21. Used one case, left 5 in place, on the cardboard with a black marker so the next person would have a better shot at planning. The storm came in the afternoon. The first thing was a wall of wind. The second was rain as a hard, sudden curtain. The warehouse skylights went from grey to roaring, thunder like trucks passing low. Jenna found her way up a rolling staircase to the roof hatch and took readings with the little weather meter she carried clipped to her pack strap. Wind 30, gusts to 40, she called down, happy in a way that had nothing to do with joy. You have to respect a person who still feels themselves when something familiar returns, even if that something is bad weather. The rain washed the roof and ran into the gutters as if it had all cared about was gravity and not the changed world beneath it. We slept in shifts that night inside the warehouse. I took first watch with Mac. We sat on a pallet and looked down the aisle under the blue light of 2 chem sticks taped to a post like a poor man's beacon. Mac cleaned a spark plug that had carboned up on the generator and told me stories about crossing the Rockies in winter and chain-socking tyres on an icy shoulder while his breath plumed and froze on his moustache. The warehouse smelled like cardboard and dust and old coffee. At 1:10 a.m, Jenna's voice came soft on the radio. The Topeka signal jumped in strength for a minute. I can hear part of the voice without static on a bearing due west. I think their antenna is boosted or something cleared line of sight for a bit. The loop says a name at the end sometimes. I think it's Argo or Argo Bay. It cuts off. Hard to tell. Copy, I said. The name made a small square of space in my head, a label for hope. I wrote it in the margin of my notepad. Argo Bay? It felt like the kind of name a research compound would have, or a place beside a lake with buildings set back into pines. We left before sunrise. The ground was still wet. The air was clean in the way air gets when the front of a storm scrubs summer with something cooler. The Ford's tyres hissed on damp pavement. I kept the speed at 55 to keep our consumption down. Mac had calculated our burn rate with a cruel honesty that made me appreciate him even more. The Ford, fully loaded, running at highway speed, would eat somewhere near 12 to 14 miles per gallon, depending on wind, grade, and how much idling we had to do at jams. The Jeep did a little better if we kept our load balanced and avoided roof drag. With the auxiliary tanks we had range, but range was an illusion if we planned to drive all the way to Colorado without banking fuel along the route. Every empty station would be an opportunity to pull from the ground if we could. Every closed farm co-op was a chance to trade a note for diesel. The closer we drew to Kansas City, the more complicated the roadscape became. Clusters of stalled cars thickened. We moved to the shoulders, up and down off ramps, weaving through like we were in a slow, industrial slalom. On a long approach to an overpass, I saw a chain of flares burned out to zinc-coloured nubs and a Missouri Department of Transportation truck parked at an angle with its light bar dead, the reflective chevrons still bright in the morning. We stopped before we hit a tangle that would require a winch, and we walked forward to plan. The overpass itself was clear, but the approach lanes were blocked by 3 mid-sized cars at weird angles. Front ends crushed, as if someone had tried to force a path and then the crowd had blocked itself. There was a service tunnel nearby to carry water under the road, a low concrete pipe mouth opening from the ditch. From inside the tunnel came the irregular scrape of something moving. Not fast, just there. "We don't play with tunnels," Max said. "We get the jeep through, then the truck, calm and straight, and we clear out." "Agreed," I said. I felt the thump of my heart because I knew how that sound could grow legs inside your head. We had rehearsed this scenario. The plan wasn't heroics, it was simple persistence. Clear debris with the truck as a shield. Don't linger. Avoid funnels. If you see movement, keep eyes on your lanes and let the person with the best angle call your next foot of movement. I got behind the wheel of the Ford, dropped the transmission into low, and kept the RPM steady. The steel grille pushed the lightest car aside with a groan. Mac guided me by radio from ahead and to the right, his voice plain. "Half a foot left. Good. Now keep straight. Neutral. I'll clear this bumper." He lifted a plastic bumper skin like he was peeling a banana and tossed it into the median. The scrape in the tunnel grew louder, then the round sound of a wet step on concrete. My peripheral vision etched a shadow in the pipe mouth, and part of my brain wanted to look. I didn't. Eyes forward, mirrors, instruments. The jeep rolled behind me when I cleared the first gap. Jenna kept perfect distance. Something touched the underside of the Ford. A sound like a boot kicked a muffler. Then nothing. We cleared the second gap, and then we were over the rise, back into open road. My breath was loud in my ears. "Everybody good?" I asked on the radio. "Still in one piece," Jenna said. "Mac?" "Still ugly," he said, which was one of his ways of saying, "Fine." We made Kansas City by late afternoon and skirted the edges like fish moving along a reef. Cities had turned into magnets, and magnets asked for sacrifices. We chose the beltways and outer roads and thought about the next day's push, rather than trying to look into every side street. When a billboard offered a travel center at the next exit, we ignored it. And when subsequent signs promised the same, we ignored those too, until we saw the sprawl thinning and the land flattening east of Lawrence. The sky had that high western sky feeling, a depth that seemed more like distance than height. Dusk brought the day's last problem. 10 minutes past a service plaza where we had decided not to stop because of the number of tents we'd seen pitched in the field beside it. What had started as an orderly situation and then grown into something frayed. The jeep hit debris. The sound was unmistakable. A flapping that became a slap that became a drumbeat. Jenna got the jeep to the shoulder before the tire shredded itself. I pulled the Ford in front of them and angled my bumper out to make a little wedge against traffic that wasn't coming. The shoulder was wide but not wide enough for comfort. The service tunnel nearby gaped like a throat again. The sun was down and the light was that blue-grey that makes shapes indistinct. Mac had the jeep's jack out before I got to his door. "I got it," he said, hands already moving like a surgeon's hands. He put the scissor jack under a frame rail, blocked the rear wheel with a triangular chock he kept strapped to the jack. "Jenna, grab the spare. Ethan, eyes on that tunnel and the tree line. If you see anything moving that isn't wind or a leaf, call it." I took a knee near the front of the jeep and watched, both hands on the Mossberg to make my posture honest to the situation. I listened for the sound of bare feet on gravel. The rustle changed by intent rather than weather. The tunnel made a hollow, passive sound, a breath. The air smelled like hot rubber cooling. Mac loosened lug nuts in a star pattern, slid the shredded tire off, rolled it to the rear, then muscled the spare on with a grunt. He had shoulders built by years of chains and binders on flatbeds in winter and summer. "There," he said, "hand me the nuts." He snugged them in sequence, lowered the jeep, then torqued them tight with his body weight on the end of the wrench. "We'll do a proper torque at next light and check the spare's pressure once we got power on a compressor." It had taken less than 4 minutes. It had felt like 40. The tunnel remained only a mouth with nothing to say. We were back on the road, while there was still some memory of daylight in the sky. We argued after that, quiet but honest. about the Topeka broadcast. We had fuel, but not as much as we wanted. We had food, but not enough to be choosy. The broadcast promised a direction, west, and a place with a name that sounded like somebody had built it to last. We had all learned that names and promises didn't equal safety. I listened to their voices and then made a call, because that was my job since the first day we left. We follow it, not because it's guaranteed, but because movement without a plan is a spiral. If the coordinates lead to a trap, we won't drive into it at speed. We'll do what we've done, stop short, watch, assess, and choose. Nobody liked it. Nobody had a better alternative. So the argument ended not in agreement, but in the quiet you get when you've accepted that the next steps will still be steps, even if you don't love where your feet are pointed. We crossed into Kansas the next morning, under a sky rinsed pale by the storm. The fields stretched in perfect rectangles, cut by section roads, and the occasional ribbon of trees tracing a drainage ditch. We made time. The Ford settled into a hum I could have listened to for hours. Somewhere past Junction City, the Topeka loop came through clean enough that we could hear the edges of the words that had been fuzzed before. The voice was male, steady but exhausted. It gave coordinates, repeated them, said Argo Bay Research Compound, asked for non-perishable food, water filtration cartridges, diesel, and skilled personnel if available. There was a pause and then stay mobile, avoid known corridors, request ID before approach, like a checklist scored into the message after too many difficult visitors. Argo Bay is real, Jenna said. Her smile was the smallest I'd seen in days, but it was real too. We didn't go into Topeka proper. We skirted south, then west again, using secondary roads to reconnect with I-70 beyond the thickest clusters of abandoned cars. The land between cities was a relief. Fewer decisions to make, long lines of sight. The human artifacts whittled down to fence posts, power lines. A water tower breaking the horizon with a town's name on it like a reliable companion. By late afternoon, we reached the edge of Hays, Kansas, and the big truck stop we had marked in bold on our paper. The sign at the highway announced fuel, food, showers, and parking for 100 trucks. The lot was eerie with its silence. Big rigs sat in neat rows like sleeping whales. Some had their cab doors open, slept in bunks visible through the narrow gap. Others were sealed up, trailers still locked, DOT inspection stickers curling on windshields. The convenience store's front windows were intact. The power was out. We didn't like staying in one place overnight near an interstate, but here, the mix of fuel and cover and line of sight was better than most. The truck stop had wide lanes and concrete barriers we could position to keep at least one approach clear for escape. We put the Ford and the Jeep nose out beside the fuel island, so our exits wouldn't require a three-point turn. Mac and I walked the perimeter while Jenna scanned with binoculars and Samir checked the store for water, dry food, and any first aid supplies we could add without lingering. The underground diesel tanks were where they always are, under the island with the high-flow dispensers for semis. The fill caps were present, locked with aluminum padlocks that had seen better days. It wasn't stealing anymore. It was survival, but we still treated it like borrowing from people we hoped to thank someday. Matt cut the hasps with a bolt cutter he'd taken from a maintenance truck a week earlier. We opened the caps, threaded our intake down with the same care as before, and set up to pump with the rotary. This time, we had an improvement in mind. One Mac had spent an hour sketching on the back of a gas station receipt the night before. Used the spare tyre mounted under the Ford as a brace for a lever arm. Loop the handle of the pump through a longer bar so we could get more flow for less effort. And set it so either one of us could crank while the other watched the intake filter. We pumped for an hour with brakes, the stream steady and better than any station since St. Louis. We kept a mason jar sample again. The diesel was clean, no water drop at the bottom, no grit. The trucks likely had been filling recently when the world ran out of patience. We filled both auxiliary tanks in the Ford, then topped the main. We filled 4 more cans for the Jeep and 1 for the generator, then called it sufficient because the sun was down and the bugs had moved in thick for the fields. We ate dinner sitting on the curb, our backs against the cool brick of the store. watching the wash of blue twilight work its way across the lot. Dinner was 1 can of chicken, 1 of corn, 1 of black beans, and 2 tortillas each. We shared a small jar of salsa like it was a holiday. Samir chewed slow and then said, "I used to spend whole meetings arguing about percent slope on access roads and the thickness of subgrade. And now the crown of the asphalt is the difference between whether water drains away from our tires or into the shoulder where we get stuck." He wasn't complaining. It was a quiet amazement. Near midnight, something moved at the edge of the lot, a shape between the trucks, then another. Our bodies went from rest to ready in that tight way training does for you, even if you didn't know you had the training. We had agreed early on that lights would be used as tools and not as comfort. We clicked a single handheld flashlight on low and kept it just off the direct line toward the movement so we would see edges and not blind our own night vision. The shapes resolved into 2 deer nosing a patch of uncut grass by the drainage. They watched us for a while, with their ears like satellite dishes, then moved on. My heart took a full 2 minutes to climb down from the tower it had run up. Still, haze gave us less sleep than the warehouse had, and not only because we could see the open highway beyond the pumps. Around 4 a.m, footsteps were audible beyond the trash cans by the entrance. We were on our feet before the shape rounded into the light. It was not one of the infected. It was a man in his 50s with a beard that had gotten too long and a zip-up hoodie zipped all the way to his chin. He had his hands raised, empty, and he stopped at the edge of the lot where we had chalked a line and set a cone earlier. He looked at the vehicles, at our faces, at the cans stacked beside the pump. He didn't come closer or shout. He said in a steady voice, "You mind if I pass through? I'll keep going west." "Keep the distance," I said. "We're not sharing close contact. You can skirt the lot." He nodded and did exactly that, walking with his hands still half raised, skirting the trucks to the far side, eyes forward. When he was gone, the space he had left behind felt larger than it should have, like a church after a quiet person leaves and you realize you were holding your breath against the possibility of a decision you didn't want to make. We had decided early we weren't a rescue caravan. We couldn't be. We had 1 truck and 1 jeep and enough supplies for 4. Every extra body changed the math. It would always be the worst math. It would always be a choice between immediate pain and future risk. We left before sunrise again. The horizon was a thin copper scar, and then a blade of gold, and then suddenly, day. As we crossed western Kansas, the wind came up steady out of the south and carried grit across the road in faint sheets. The first hour was easy. The second hour we started seeing the edges of the day's dust storm gathering, lines of low brown cloud, little whirlwinds in the fields where the soil had nothing holding it. By the time we crossed the state line into eastern Colorado, the world had turned the color of cardboard. Visibility dropped in slow inches. The air felt like it had weight. I clicked the Ford's headlights on, even though there were barely any other vehicles moving. There were hazards you called out in a dust storm that were different than rain. The reduction in air for the radiator, the tendency for fine grit to clog air filters, the way the horizon disappears so you start reading the road by texture rather than distance. We slowed to 40, then 30, then 25 when we saw wrecks loom from the haze. Full-size pickups angled across lanes like a child had left die-cast toys frozen mid-play. "Keep 10 car lengths," I said to Jenna on the radio. "If you lose my taillights, count 10 seconds and stop. Don't drive blind." "Copy," she said. Her voice was small inside the static. "Mac's on the map, watching for the next exit where we can get off. If it gets any worse." We pulled off at a rest area that was little more than a paved loop, a wind-shredded flag, and a single restroom building with its doors bolted open. The dust found its way into everything, a fine film on the dash, and our tongues, and the laminate on the maps. We sat in the cabs, engines idling because the wind was too high to trust the hood to stay open if we stopped and checked the air intakes. The storm had arrived, and there was nothing to do but wait for it to move along the line it had chosen. Then, like it does, it eased. The grit in the air fell out. The light went from brown to grey to ordinary. The world resolved. We pulled back onto I-70 and rolled another 20 miles. The wind still pushed the truck sideways, a little like a big animal leaning. When the dust finally thinned enough to make out the signage, I saw it first. A rectangular sign on 2 posts just off a frontage road. Welcome to Argo Bay Research Compound Restricted Access. The letters were reflective and still crisp. Someone had maintained this. Beneath it, smaller text. Authorized vehicles only. Visitors use call box. We drew to a stop on the shoulder and all got out to look at it as if it might say more if we stared hard enough. The sign sat beside a chain-link fence topped with 3 strands of barbed wire. The sort of fence meant to tell casual trespassers this was not a playground. Beyond the fence, the land rose a little, dotted with scrub, then flattened into a plateau where the buildings must be. I could make out the sparkle of solar arrays set in rows. A windsock on a pole moved lazily. The frontage road led toward a gate that was out of sight around a bend, but the top of a security camera pole and the flashing blink of a small solar-powered light were visible, which told me more people than just us had made it here, and someone had decided to keep certain systems functioning. "Argo Bay," Jenna said, almost to herself. "It's real." "Or at least the signmaker's honest," Max said. He looked the fence up and down, and then squinted at the far ridgeline where movement would be hooded by the light. "We don't roll up to the gate as if we're home," he added. "We pause short. We show our faces. We let them speak first." "Agreed," I said. I swallowed, tasted dust, and then keyed my handheld. "We'll do this slow. I'll call on the general VHF frequency and then the GMRS the broadcast used. Keep your hands visible. We offer identity. We do not offer to enter unless asked." We moved the vehicles forward in a slow crawl along the frontage road. The chain-link fence kept pace on our right. The road curved and the gate appeared. A metal rollback design on a track with a keypad and a camera above it. Near the keypad, a weatherproof call box with a speaker grill showed wear as if hands had hit it recently. The gate itself was closed, but not sagging. Beyond it, through the bars, I saw a road sloping upward and the roofs of low buildings, square and clean and practical. Solar panels glinted. A small wind turbine spun and stopped and spun again. The kind of infrastructure a research place builds when it doesn't want to rely on anyone else for power. I parked the Ford 10 yards back, left the engine idling, because a warm engine is a fast engine if we needed to move. The Jeep stopped behind me with good spacing. The air smelled like a mix of dust and sun-heated metal, and the faint electric scent that comes when new equipment runs in dry wind. I stepped out alone, hands visible, and approached the call box. The others stayed in the vehicles with radios up and windows down. My heart beat in my throat in a way I recognized from the doors I'd knocked on as a paramedic when I didn't know what was on the other side. You can be calm and still be aware of every inch of your skin. I pressed the call button. The speaker made a pop like an old PA system waking up. "This is Ethan Cole," I said, voice steady. "We're a small group of 4. We heard your broadcast, followed your coordinates. We have supplies. We're not sick. We're mobile and can remain that way if you need it. We're requesting information and guidance." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind catching the microphone and making a low rush. Then the speaker crackled, and a voice I didn't recognize, male, calm but careful, said, "Copy, Ethan Cole. Please return to your vehicles. Stay in place. Keep hands visible. Identify the members of your group by name and any skills you want to declare. Do not approach the gate." I walked backward with my palms up, turned, and got into the truck. The seat felt like an anchor under me. I grabbed the mic. "They're there," I said, and told the others what the voice had asked. I clicked the call box again and spoke. "Names are Ethan Cole, former paramedic, Jenna Morales, radio technician, weather spotter, Marcus Hendricks, mechanic, former long-haul driver, Samir Patel, civil engineer. We have basic tools, medical supplies, fuel, non-perishable food. We have 2 vehicles, We can leave if this is not a safe time for you to receive visitors." The speaker went quiet again. The silence now had weight, like a hand on the back of my neck. I could imagine somebody inside a concrete office watching a camera feed and weighing checkboxes. 4 people, no visible rash, steady voices, correct use of callbox, declared skills. I could imagine someone else, farther back, looking up from a table where maps were spread and saying, "Let's not let anyone else inside," because the last time they had had a visitor, it had cost them too much. The speaker crackled once more. The voice returned, slightly clearer, as if they had adjusted the gain on their side. "Copy, Ethan. Hold position. Do not exit your vehicles. Do not approach the gate. Keep your engines idling. We will ask additional questions. We will also need to perform a visual check. Stay calm. Identify yourselves again by first name only when asked. We will speak to each of you in turn." I looked at the faces in the mirrors. Jenna's eyes were wide but excited. Mac's were flat and steady. Samir's hands were folded like he was bracing for a wind gust. I pressed the transmit. "We're ready." There was a beat of quiet, and then the voice said, "Stay in your vehicles. Identify yourselves." The wind moved across the fence and made the wires sing a little like a low harp string. The solar lights that marked the entry points blinked a pattern I didn't know. A reassuring but clinical rhythm that said machines here still listen to commands. Behind the fence, something hummed. An inverter, a pump, a piece of infrastructure continuing a job it had been given before the world changed. I glanced at the dash clock. It read 3:18 p.m. I took a slow breath, felt it move into my ribs and back out. The Ford idled with the familiar low rattle that had become the background track of our days. My hand rested near the radio but not on it. The other hand held the wheel gently at the top, as if showing whoever was watching that I still understood how to sit and wait without making the waiting into a threat. "Ethan," the voice said from the speaker again, as if we were in the middle of an intake interview and this was the next line on the form. "Confirm. 4 total. Any pets? Any recent injuries? Any known exposures within the past 72 hours? Any symptoms of fever, confusion, or difficulty breathing?" I clicked transmit and answered each in turn, clear and precise, using the tone I had used 1,000 times when gathering a history in an ambulance. Facts, no drama. 4 total, no pets, minor scrapes only, treated, no signs of infection, no known exposures within the past 72, no symptoms, rested last night, eating, hydrating. We're ready to comply with any additional checks you require. There was a pause, and then the voice said, "Understood. Hold position while we confirm your transmission and review your approach." The speaker clicked off. I heard my own breath again, then Jenna's low laugh through the open window behind me, a laugh of pure nerves. "I feel like we're at an interview for an apartment and we forgot the references," she said. Mac didn't smile. "I feel like they're deciding whether the cost of letting us in is higher than the risk of leaving us out here." He wasn't wrong. We all knew the arithmetic now. The wind nudged the truck. The sun warmed the hood. The blinking solar lights continued their slow, unbothered rhythm. Beyond the gate, the buildings waited with quiet, kept by systems that hadn't given up because their job was to keep going until told to stop. We had followed a voice through static, across states, through ghost towns and storms, and long hours of small decisions. We had turned the handles of hand pumps until our arms were rubber. We had counted lug nuts in a star pattern under a sky that didn't care whether we got them tight or not. We had said no to things we wanted to say yes to, and yes to things we wanted to say no to. The gate did not care. The gate would do what the people behind it told it to do. The radio on my dash cracked and carried the voice again, a little closer, as if someone had moved a monitor microphone nearer to their own mouth. "Stay in your vehicles," it said. "Identify yourselves." I looked at Jenna in my mirror, at Mac's profile, at Samir's hands. Then I pressed the button, my voice steady and ready, because that was what I had left to offer. "Ethan," I said. "Jenna," she said, strong now. like a weather report in a storm's first breath. Mac, he said, one syllable. Iron. Samir, he said, quiet, unshaking. We sat where we were, in the sun and the breath of a steady wind. The road behind us had been a long collection of simple, necessary acts that added up to motion. The road ahead was a question. The gate and the sign and the solar lights made the question visible in a way hope so rarely is. I waited for the next word from the box. Hands on the wheel, engine humming, dust settling in a fine layer that didn't change the truck's ability to carry us the next mile if we were told to go, or the next few yards if we were told to stay. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.